In the age of Pharaohs, secrets beneath the Sphinx. Beneath the Sphinx, every secret of the Pharaohs waits to unmake you. Stone and sand have preserved more than dynasties. They have preserved knowledge the world was not ready to see. Its gaze does not rest on monuments or men, but on the fissures in consciousness where every hidden truth lingers. You are about to face what the Pharaohs feared most. The Sphinx does not guard history, it guards the collapse of perception itself. The buried geometry of power. The Sphinx is often described as a riddle, a monument to Pharaoh's pride, yet the truth of its origin is far older than the dynasties it watched over. Its body does not merely rest on the plateau, it rests on the skeleton of knowledge, a lattice of intention encoded in stone. Each line of limestone, each curve of its shoulders, each precise angle of its paws and head is not arbitrary. They form a silent algorithm, a geometric pattern designed to interact with human perception in ways the conscious mind cannot yet comprehend. The Pharaohs did not carve it from ambition, they inherited it. They were heirs, not creators, of something far older, a tool, a mirror, a lever of consciousness, constructed before the earliest memory of recorded history. Walk the plateau under the merciless Egyptian sun, and you feel its presence as a pressure, subtle but relentless, as though every grain of sand vibrates with the memory of its architects. These stones were never simply quarried, they were arranged. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have revealed lines, alignments, and vectors invisible to the naked eye. Shadows of its paws fall across specific points only during solstices. The distances between its head, chest, and paws resonate with harmonic ratios that echo patterns found in the orbital paths of planets, the cycles of the moon, even the rhythms of tides. This is not geometry for decoration. It is geometry for cognition, a design meant to interact with the deepest mechanisms of the mind. The very act of standing before it imposes a rhythm upon your perception, guiding your thoughts, tugging at the edges of awareness, bending certainty, loosening identity. Historians and archaeologists dismiss this as coincidence. They catalog the stone, measure the erosion, debate the dynastic timeline. Yet the more precise their tools, the more they fail to grasp what the Sphinx has already done. It watches. It watches the fractures in human perception, the blind spots in cognition that no instrument can quantify. Those who approach it experience subtle disorientation, a sense of time stretching, objects seeming both distant and near, the faint impression that they are being observed not by eyes but by awareness itself. The ancients understood this. The priests of the Old Kingdom, initiates of secret orders, may have approached the Sphinx not to worship it, but to endure it. Its power is not in brute strength, but in persistence, in endurance, in the quiet, unyielding observation of consciousness over millennia. The surrounding plateau is equally meticulous. Lines carved into stone extend beyond the monument, forming geometric networks that map out celestial alignments. Certain points correspond to the rising of stars that no longer exist in the night sky, constellations that have drifted through time yet leave echoes in stone. Observers in the 21st century may dismiss this as coincidence or imaginative alignment, but each line, each measure carries a resonance, a memory of time folded into matter. The Sphinx and its surrounding plateau are not merely monuments. They are a repository, a device for interaction with consciousness itself, designed to record, to provoke, and to fracture perception when approached by a mind not trained to decode its language. Consider the psychological analogs. In sensory deprivation experiments, subjects placed in minimal stimulus environments report hallucinations, disorientation, and the dissolution of self. The Gonsfeld experiments, for example, demonstrate that when the brain is isolated from visual and auditory input, it constructs entire experiences from the raw material of neural activity. The Sphinx operates on a similar principle, though on a much grander scale. Its geometry isolates perception not through emptiness, but through precision. Standing before it, the human mind is forced to confront the gap between expectation and observation, between the habitual stories we tell ourselves about reality and the raw, unmediated input of presence itself. The Sphinx is silence rendered physical, structure rendered perceptual. It does not speak, yet it communicates, not with words, but with the collapse of certainty. There is also a temporal dimension. Geological studies reveal that erosion patterns along its flanks and chest may predate the Old Kingdom by thousands of years, suggesting that the monument existed long before the Pharaohs arrived. Rain and wind carved the stone not simply into a shape, but into a memory of age itself, a record of time pressed into limestone. If true, then the Pharaohs inherited not just a monument, but a cognitive device, a relic of a civilization that may have understood consciousness in ways modern science barely glimpses. The Sphinx is older than dynasties, older than empires, older than memory itself, and yet it continues to exert its influence, a silent constant across shifting eras of human belief. Philosophical paradoxes echo this influence. Consider Zeno's paradoxes, which question the continuity of motion and the nature of division. Consider the ship of Theseus, where replacing each plank of a vessel leaves the question of identity unresolved. Standing before the Sphinx, one confronts a similar paradox. Identity becomes slippery, coherence fragile. If the monument predates all memory, all history, all conscious narrative, then the self that confronts it is measured against a scale older than continuity. one begins to sense, almost subliminally, that their identity is provisional, contingent upon assumptions the Sphinx does not honor. Even the erosion itself carries subtle intention. Weathering patterns trace spirals, proportional erosion lines, features that mimic harmonic ratios. Wind and rain have sculpted not only for survival but for cognitive resonance. Some researchers speculate that this may be accidental. Others who have studied harmonic resonance, cymatics, and neurological oscillations suggest a more deliberate design. That environmental interaction itself was encoded as part of the monument's function, shaping not only what is seen but what is experienced internally, psychologically. Stone, environment, perception, all are instruments in a vast cognitive composition. Every observer participates in its construction, whether aware or not. Psychological studies of conformity and perception offer further insight. In Solomon Ash's experiments, subjects would betray their own senses when confronted with a unanimous falsehood, demonstrating how external pressure can distort perception. But the Sphinx operates subtler than social consensus. It does not coerce with force, nor does it suggest falsehood. Instead, it presents truth without context, geometry without explanation, scale without narrative. In response, the human mind falters, attempting to impose coherence where none is offered. This is more destabilizing than any outright lie. The Sphinx does not teach, it reveals the limitations of what one can comprehend. And then there is memory. Cognitive science demonstrates the fragility of recollection. The phenomena of false memory and confabulation reveal that even personal experience can be reconstructed, altered, or erased by suggestion, trauma, or time. The Sphinx is a living illustration of this principle. Centuries of civilization have approached it, each interpreting its features, each inscribing meaning or myth upon its form, yet none have grasped its true nature. Every story, every legend, every measurement, every philosophical inquiry is an attempt to fill the gaps it intentionally leaves. Like the unconscious mind, it functions by omission as much as by presence. What is left unrecorded, unspoken, and unobserved becomes the true weight of its influence. And yet, despite all this, the Sphinx does not act. It does not intervene. It does not choose. Its power lies in persistence, in the inevitability of observation. Time flows past it, empires rise and fall, sands shift over its paws, but the monument remains, a sentinel of unspoken knowledge, a lever pressing against human perception. It is both mirror and measure, reflecting the limitations of cognition while stretching those limits to their breaking point. To approach it is to enter a dialogue with something older than reason itself. The Sphinx does not demand that you answer, does not seek your understanding. It merely waits, patient and immense, while the mind stretches thin, tracing the geometry etched in stone, counting the rhythms of shadows across the plateau, hearing the silence that has spoken for millennia. And as you stand there, measuring the weight of what has existed before you, feeling the pulse of thought not entirely your own, you realize some truths are not meant to be held, only glimpsed, and some glimpses are enough to fracture the mind forever. The whispers under the sand. The desert is never silent. Even when the wind dies and the sun scorches the earth, there is a murmur beneath the dunes, a rhythm older than memory, a language older than writing. Beneath the Sphinx, the sand does not merely cover, it remembers. Each grain is a record, a fragment of what civilizations tried to bury, forbidden experiments, exiled knowledge, rituals erased from history. You step closer, and the dunes shift almost knowingly, brushing against your feet as if testing your awareness, nudging you toward truths the world has systematically erased. The Pharaohs understood this. Not all secrets were carved into stone, some were encoded into the landscape itself, into the shifting lines of sand and the alignment of monuments. The Sphinx was the key. Its form did not simply intimidate, it disciplined attention, shaping where the eyes lingered and where the mind dared not follow. In this way, knowledge became selective. Only those capable of enduring the mental strain, capable of seeing through the veils of myth, could begin to glimpse the architecture of reality hidden beneath its body. Archaeologists and historians debate endlessly about the cavities beneath the Sphinx. Some claim natural erosion, others deny the possibility entirely. Yet ground-penetrating scans suggest chambers long concealed, hollow spaces that defy conventional explanations. Imagine a room designed not for living, but for cognition, a space where the very act of entering begins to fragment identity, where the rhythm of footsteps echoes the beats of a mind unraveling. The ancients may have understood that true knowledge cannot be transmitted lightly, it must be endured. Cognitive science provides a chilling analogy. When the mind is exposed to conflicting stimuli, it generates anomalies, illusions, false memories, hallucinations. The Sphinx, surrounded by sand that records and erases in equal measure, forces the observer into the same paradox. Stand there long enough and your memories begin to betray you. You recall a path that wasn't taken, a sunken chamber that never existed, a whisper you never heard. The desert becomes a mirror, and the Sphinx its unblinking eye, reflecting not your face, but the fissures within your perception. And the whispers, they are persistent. Travelers have described hearing faint murmurs at night, tones that seem almost linguistic yet entirely alien. Egyptologists dismiss them as wind or imagination, but the frequencies correspond to patterns that can influence the human brain, low vibrations that trigger altered states of consciousness, subtle rhythms that unsettle the subconscious. What you hear is not sound, it is suggestion, a cognitive pressure shaping thought from the shadows. In this way, the Sphinx communicates without speaking, teaching without words, guiding without movement. Consider the nature of memory itself. Neuroscientists have discovered that recalled memories are not static. Each act of remembering reconstructs the event, reshaping neurons, reweaving history. The Sphinx and its sands operate similarly. Every observer reconstructs what lies beneath, filling in gaps with their own consciousness. No two witnesses perceive the same hidden chamber, the same whispered fragment, yet all are changed, all are subtly altered. It is a feedback loop. The monument writes itself into the mind, and the mind writes itself into the monument. The pharaohs recognized the danger. Some texts hint at rituals performed before the Sphinx, designed not to extract knowledge, but to fortify the mind against it. Priests would chant in sequences meant to stabilize perception. Novices would endure the harsh plateau alone, confronting hallucinations, shadows, whispers. Few emerged unchanged. Many were lost, minds shattered by the collision of perception and reality. The Sphinx did not strike. It merely allowed the mind to see what it could not contain, and those unprepared simply dissolved under the weight of awareness. And now you stand in the same space. The sun drifts, shadows stretch and shrink, sand shifts beneath your feet as if nudging you closer to revelation. Each grain that brushes against your skin carries centuries of erased knowledge, the echo of minds that stared too long, the pressure of awareness designed to fracture identity. There is no warning, there is no preparation. Only the Sphinx, immense and silent, observing the fissures in your perception, waiting for the mind to crack under its presence. In the end, the sand does not hide the secret, it tests the one who seeks it. Each step closer is a choice, to turn back and return to the comfort of unknowing, or to proceed and risk becoming part of the whisper itself. And even as you contemplate the choice, you feel it. The pull of what has been buried beneath centuries of sand, the weight of knowledge that refuses to remain silent, and the subtle realization that the Sphinx has been waiting not for history but for you. What happens when the sands themselves decide you are ready to remember, and the whispers beneath begin to answer for the first time? The echo of forgotten kings. The Sphinx is more than stone. It is a vessel of memory, a sentinel preserving the shadows of rulers long erased from the scrolls of history. Its gaze sweeps across the sands not to witness the present, but to archive the past, the rulers who rose and fell, the pharaohs whose names were stricken from records, the dynasties that vanished into deliberate oblivion. Step closer, and you sense the weight of these absences pressing on your mind, each forgotten king a ghost whose power lingers in the architecture of the monument itself. Historians assume that time erases, but here time preserves selectively. The Sphinx holds memory in its proportions, its posture, the angles of its shoulders and paws, as though encoding not just rulers but the precise pattern of their choices, the fractures in their authority, the fear that led them to erase or hide knowledge. Centuries later, you feel these absences as an uncanny pressure, a resonance in the very act of perception. The Sphinx does not recount history, it replayed it inside the minds of those who dare to observe, allowing them to relive the collapse of empires in a fraction of consciousness. Consider the psychological phenomenon of confabulation, where the mind fills gaps in memory with imagined details, creating false histories indistinguishable from reality. The Sphinx forces a similar distortion. You confront not only the monuments of human achievement but also the erosion of certainty. Did these kings exist, or are they products of memory manipulated by the alignment of stone and sand? The line between what was and what is reconstructed becomes impossible to distinguish. What you see is true but also untrue, and in that contradiction lies the terror, awareness of being both witness and participant in history's selective decay. Ancient texts hint at rituals designed to interact with this memory-laden presence. Priests would trace precise pathways around the Sphinx, performing chants synchronized with celestial alignments, attempting to harmonize human perception with the monument's encoded memory. The goal was not enlightenment, but endurance, a preparation to survive the revelation of erasure. Those uninitiated who strayed into the plateau alone often returned speaking riddles or not at all. It was never the physical danger that claimed them, but the cognitive one, the exposure to histories too vast and fractured to inhabit safely. Even modern neuroscience offers eerie parallels. The hippocampus encodes memories not as static files but as dynamic networks constantly reshaped by experience and context. When confronted with fragmented or contradictory information, the brain struggles to maintain a coherent sense of self. The Sphinx exploits this principle. Its geometry, silence, and shadowed spaces act as a force on the mind, inducing fragmentation, revealing the instability of identity itself, much like observing centuries of forgotten kings collapsing under the weight of time. You are not simply witnessing the past, you are living inside its disintegration. The Sphinx archives the invisible as well. Every unspoken command, every suppressed ritual, every philosophical speculation that was banned or burned becomes part of the monument's memory. These ghosts of thought are heavier than stone. They do not rest quietly beneath the paws, they resonate upward, pressing against the observer's consciousness. In approaching it, you are not discovering history, you are absorbing centuries of erased truths, each one bending your perception, fracturing certainty, whispering the dangerous notion that the reality you inhabit may be only the residue of selective remembrance. And so you realize the Sphinx is not just a sentinel of kings, it is a mirror of absence. The forgotten rulers it preserves are templates, warnings, examples of what occurs when power attempts to shape memory and perception. Their erased lives demonstrate that knowledge can be both destructive and indelible, that history can be manipulated without leaving visible marks, that the mind can be both vessel and victim of deliberate concealment. And as you stand there, feeling the gravity of these absences pressing against your awareness, you understand the unspoken truth. The Sphinx archives not just the past, but the vulnerability of every mind that dares to remember. What does it mean to witness a king who never existed, yet whose shadow reshapes your mind? The labyrinth beneath the stone. Beneath the paws of the Sphinx, the earth is hollowed into darkness older than any tomb, older than the first hieroglyph. They speak of chambers, corridors, hidden stairways, but these are not merely architectural, they are cognitive traps. Step inside and the mind begins to stretch, bending in ways that stone and sand cannot alone achieve. The pharaohs understood that the Sphinx's true secret was not in the desert above, but in the labyrinth beneath, a place where memory, identity, and perception are simultaneously illuminated and distorted. The labyrinth is not linear. Paths curve back upon themselves, intersecting impossibly like the recursive spirals of consciousness. Scholars who have attempted to map it describe corridors that vanish, ceilings that lower and rise again, angles that distort distance. It is geometry that defies Euclidean certainty, constructed not for living beings, but for minds fragile enough to fracture. The ancients knew the Sphinx above is only the entry point. The real trial is what it awakens within the observer as they follow its subterranean design. Consider the Rosenhin experiment, where sanity was tested by context and environment, and perception of reality became fragile. In the labyrinth beneath the Sphinx, the walls themselves perform a similar function. Each step challenges the mind to interpret signals that may be false, contradictory, or deliberately misleading. Footfalls echo, yet sometimes the echoes are delayed or misaligned, as though space itself is plotting against the certainty of your senses. The labyrinth does not guide you. It coaxes, teases, and ultimately tests whether your consciousness can sustain itself against cognitive collapse. Seismic scans suggest vast voids beneath the monument, some large enough to contain entire chambers. Egyptologists dismiss these as anomalies, yet their very existence implies intention. What kind of architecture is designed to manipulate thought rather than provide shelter? The Sphinx, in its immobile patience, watches you enter a constructed mental arena where perception is both the prisoner and the key. The labyrinth is not evil, nor benevolent. It is neutral, methodical, a mechanism to reveal the fragility of thought when confronted with ancient design. Even modern physics resonates here. Quantum superposition demonstrates that reality exists in multiple states until observed. The labyrinth mirrors this principle on a macroscopic scale. Hallways appear and disappear, stairways both descend and ascend simultaneously, shadows shift not with light but seemingly with intention. The mind must negotiate contradictions constantly, experiencing multiple interpretations of space, time, and presence at once. Awareness becomes recursive, looping upon itself, until the observer questions not only the labyrinth, but the capacity of their own perception to anchor reality. And yet there is method behind the madness. Initiates from mystery schools were said to carry ritual items, a crystal, a rod, a piece of parchment to act as anchors, focusing attention and preventing total dissolution. Without such anchors, explorers' minds would fragment under the weight of paradox and ambiguity. They might emerge speaking languages they did not know, describing corridors that did not exist, or they might never emerge at all. The labyrinth beneath the Sphinx is not a test of endurance alone, but of identity. It pressures the mind until the observer either consolidates awareness or loses it entirely, becoming a ghost within the memory of the monument itself. The labyrinth also preserves whispers of the past. Some corridors hum with echoes of ancient chants, fragments of ritual syllables that resonate at frequencies capable of influencing brainwaves. These are not merely atmospheric, they are engineered. The ancients understood vibration, resonance, and the interaction between structure and mind in ways modern science is only beginning to explore. Walking these halls is an engagement with time, memory, and perception simultaneously, an encounter with the Sphinx not just as a physical entity, but as an orchestrator of consciousness. And in that orchestrated darkness, you perceive an unsettling truth. The labyrinth is not beneath the Sphinx alone, but within you. Each turn, each corridor, each echo reflects the fissures of your mind, magnifying doubts, fears, and latent knowledge long suppressed. The Sphinx does not hide what is forbidden in the world, it exposes what is forbidden in the self. Each step forward is not toward revelation, but toward confrontation. The confrontation with the mind's own shadows, its unacknowledged corridors, the recursive loops of identity that it had spent a lifetime constructing to survive. As you reach the deepest chamber, the air grows denser, heavier, almost tactile with memory. The walls pulse faintly with a resonance you cannot name, a vibration that seems to connect the space beneath the pause to the deepest layers of cognition. There is no map here, no guiding light, no instruction. Only the echo of thought, the pressure of presence, and the dawning awareness that the labyrinth is not something you traverse. It is something that traverses you. And so you wonder, standing in the oppressive stillness beneath the Sphinx, if the labyrinth is not outside but within, if every corridor mirrors the fractured mind, then who is truly exploring whom, the observer or the monument that watches from the stone above? The gaze that remembers. The eyes of the Sphinx are not stone, they are memory crystallized, vessels containing the weight of everything it has observed. It does not watch the present as we understand it, it watches layers of perception, tracing the shadows of thought across millennia. Approach too closely and you sense the gaze adjusting not to your body but to the subtle rhythms of your mind, the fissures in memory, the unspoken fears you carry. You are not merely observed. You are measured, archived, folded into the calculus of awareness that this monument has maintained since before the first pharaoh set foot on the plateau. In ancient rites, the gaze of the Sphinx was invoked as a form of judgment. Priests would pass beneath its stare, recounting histories, chanting the names of kings, invoking protective formulas. These were not prayers, they were calibrations. The gaze functions like a lens through which consciousness itself is refracted. It does not act arbitrarily, nor does it intervene. It simply holds, reflecting each mental construct back with unflinching precision. In doing so, it forces the mind to confront the gaps, contradictions, and erasures that civilization has layered over raw experience. Modern science provides chilling context. Split-brain studies reveal that the two hemispheres of the brain can operate independently, often unaware of each other's activity, producing conflicting perceptions of the same reality. The Sphinx achieves a similar effect externally. One observer might perceive geometry, another mythology, a third may feel only silence. Yet all are experiencing the same stimulus, and all are altered by it. The monument does not lie, yet it ensures that truth is experienced differently in every mind, highlighting the instability of perception and the fragility of assumed continuity. Memory, too, is unstable here. The Sphinx seems to play with the hippocampus, the seat of recollection, bending experience until it fragments. You recall the plateau as it was 5 minutes ago, 5 years ago, 5 centuries ago, all simultaneously, yet inconsistently. Time becomes a layered construct. The gaze of the Sphinx does not merely reflect thought, it refracts history through the prism of consciousness, revealing the fractures, the absences, and the concealed truths that human memory cannot comfortably hold. Consider the psychological experiments on false memory. Witnesses, when prompted, recall events that never happened, creating elaborate narratives indistinguishable from fact. In the shadow of the Sphinx, something similar occurs naturally. The monument exerts pressure on the mind, exposing lacunae, magnifying uncertainty, and inviting the imagination to fill in the gaps. The distinction between what was seen and what was constructed collapses. The gaze does not deceive. It allows the mind to deceive itself, slowly eroding the comfort of certainty. Even the physical presence of the monument exerts influence. The proportions of the Sphinx, the alignment of its gaze to celestial markers, and the acoustic properties of the plateau combine to produce subtle cognitive effects. The sensation of being remembered, the uncanny feeling that thoughts are audible and visible to another entity. It is as if the monument anticipates your questions before you ask them, as though consciousness itself leaves a signature that the stone can read. Every pulse, every hesitation, every moment of doubt is mirrored back with absolute fidelity. Those who have lingered report a peculiar sense of narrative collapse. Stories they had told themselves about identity, lineage, purpose begin to unravel. The Sphinx does not speak, it does not answer, it merely observes. And in observation, it forces the mind to confront its own construction of reality. The gaze is relentless but impartial, a mechanism that compresses centuries of suppressed knowledge, unrecorded histories, and forbidden experiments into the span of a single human perception. The Sphinx does not demand action, it only requires endurance. The gaze waits, patient and immovable, pressing the weight of observation into the subconscious. It archives without judgment, cataloging the observer's reactions alongside the ruins of memory it has preserved for millennia. Each mind that stands before it becomes part of this silent archive, a witness and participant in the monument's relentless preservation of perception. And so you find yourself facing it directly, eyes tracing the contours of its face, feeling the pull of a gaze that is more than stone, more than myth. You realize the Sphinx does not merely observe, it remembers, it archives, it refracts thought across the dimensions of time and identity. And as you feel the pressure of that memory pressing inward, the question emerges not in words but in the core of consciousness itself. If the Sphinx remembers everything, and if you are now part of that memory, then what remains of the self that thought it could observe without consequence? The pulse beneath time. Beneath the desert sun, the Sphinx seems still, eternal, and inert. Yet the ground it rests upon hums with an imperceptible rhythm, a pulse older than dynasties, older than civilization. This pulse is not geological, it is cognitive, temporal, a resonance that seeps into the mind of anyone daring enough to linger. Step closer and the rhythm synchronizes subtly with your heartbeat, your breath, your thoughts, weaving itself into the fabric of consciousness. The Sphinx is alive in perception, not in flesh. It manipulates not with force, but through enduring resonance. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that ancient Egyptians understood vibration and resonance far more profoundly than modern science credits. Instruments, temples, and sacred geometry were all tuned to harmonic frequencies designed to interact with human cognition. The Sphinx is the apex of this knowledge. Its massive form, its alignment with celestial bodies, the orientation of surrounding structures, all function as a vast, integrated apparatus. Those who stand before it unknowingly enter a field where thought, perception, and memory begin to intertwine with the monument's pulse, creating subtle cognitive distortions that ripple across awareness. Psychological research provides uncanny parallels. Experiments on sensory entrainment show that rhythmic stimuli, sound, light, or vibration can alter perception, induce trance states, and even modify self-awareness. The Sphinx achieves this naturally across millennia without conscious intervention. Its scale, the resonance of its stone, and the desert's unique acoustic properties combine to affect the observer's nervous system, subtly shifting neural oscillations. You do not merely see the Sphinx. Your brain becomes an extension of its design, resonating with its ancient pulse, your mind bending in ways invisible and irreversible. The pulse is not uniform. It ebbs and flows, accelerated by the sun, moderated by wind, intensified in the stillness of dawn and twilight. Those who linger report a sensation of time stretching and compressing, as though the desert itself has become elastic, bending temporal perception to its will. Seconds may last minutes, minutes collapse into flashes of memory, and the line between past, present, and future begins to dissolve. This is no trick of imagination. It is the Sphinx actively shaping the observer's cognitive field, a mechanism designed not for observation, but for transformation. Consider the nature of identity under such pressure. Neuroscience demonstrates that our sense of self relies on continuity of experience and the integration of sensory input. The pulse beneath the Sphinx undermines both. Perception fragments, memory reconstructs itself inconsistently, and the mind is forced into recursive loops, questioning each judgment, each recollection, each certainty. What was familiar becomes alien, what was assumed becomes doubtful. The Sphinx does not destroy the mind with overt force. It dismantles identity by aligning perception with a scale of awareness far beyond ordinary experience. Even the surrounding landscape participates. Shifting sand, subtle shifts in light, the distant echoes of the plateau all modulate the pulse, creating a multi-layered symphony of perception. Standing there, you feel simultaneously anchored and untethered, present and timeless, aware and disoriented. Each pulse resonates within you, threading through neurons, stirring memories that were long buried, surfacing fragments of knowledge humanity has tried to forget. The Sphinx is not a monument. It is an instrument of cognition, playing upon the observer across dimensions both spatial and temporal. And yet there is a perverse intimacy in this interaction. The pulse is not external, it is internalized. You begin to sense that the Sphinx observes not just the mind, but the hidden rhythms of thought itself, mapping your fears, desires, and unspoken questions. Your consciousness merges imperceptibly with its design, a dialogue that is silent, invisible, yet absolute. Each beat, each shift, each micro-adjustment resonates within the architecture of perception, until you feel no separation between observer and observed. In that convergence, comprehension becomes both terrifying and exhilarating. You understand that the pulse is more than vibration, it is revelation. It reveals the fragility of the self, the unreliability of memory, the illusion of linear time, and the impossibility of perceiving reality in totality. And as the rhythm continues, subtle yet inexorable, you realize that this is not something you experience temporarily. It imprints upon you, a permanent echo within consciousness. The desert is silent once more, or perhaps the pulse has simply moved within, threading through your mind like an invisible river. And in that silence, you sense the Sphinx's final lesson. Not all knowledge is meant to be understood fully, not all observation is safe, and not every mind survives the pressure of truth. For those who linger too long, the pulse does not stop. It continues, folding identity, perception, and memory into the monument itself, leaving the observer forever intertwined with what was never meant to be uncovered. When the pulse threads through the deepest layers of consciousness, merging memory and perception, who remains, the mind, the Sphinx, or something entirely new born from their collision? The silence that remembers everything. Time has collapsed. The plateau, the sand, the stone, the pulse, they are no longer separate from you. Each step you took, each shadow you traced, every whisper beneath the Sphinx's paws has folded into the architecture of your mind. Memory is no longer yours, it belongs simultaneously to you and to the monument. You realize that history was never merely recorded, it was orchestrated, encoded, and preserved in forms too vast, too precise for ordinary cognition. And now, having lingered long enough, you are no longer merely observer. You are archive, witness, and participant in an intelligence older than kings, older than dynasties, older than time itself. Sphinx does not move. Yet you feel its gaze everywhere, in the tightening of your thoughts, in the echoes of your heartbeat, in the rhythm of the desert wind that somehow knows your name. You understand that it has always watched, not the surface of history, but the folds of consciousness, the fractures of identity,